Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed.
What is up, everybody? My name is James D. Fiore, and this is Blackballed. This is part 2 of a double header tonight. We had Dr. Michael Geist on at 7 o'clock, and Dr. Geist talked to us about Bill C-11. I think I learned some things. I'm not 100% sure because the bill is so weirdly complex and the government is being so secretive about it. But nonetheless, as usual with Dr. Geist, it was very informative. My guest tonight, we have been inundated lately with a lack of coverage of the Russia-Ukraine war in Canada, I believe. We have, at the Dean Blundell Network, a couple people that we like to bring on to give us updates. Alex is one of the dudes that I'm thinking of right now who comes to us from Ukraine when he gives us his updates and lets us know what it's like to live inside a battlefield. And when I looked at the numbers just now, this is updated 2 days ago, we're looking at about 30,000 deaths, about 54,000 non-fatal injuries. A displaced amount of people is 14 million. That's crazy. Buildings destroyed at least 140,000, and the property damage, they're saying, is approximately $350 billion US. But the human toll is something that's going to always come in warfare, especially this type of war. But then there's other things that are coming into play now. I saw this headline today that says the US is fretting over the Ukrainian tactics and raises risk Putin will go nuclear. There's a lot of talk lately about Putin going with tactical nuclear weapons as a preemptive strike and what that means for the international community, especially NATO. So, here to make sense of all this for us is the author of Connected Soldiers, Life, Leadership, and the Social Connections in Modern War. And his name is John Spencer. John, how you doing, buddy?
Great,
sorry,
brother.
I messed up it's really late for me. I'm one of those guys that, like, it's Eastern time. It's 10:30 Eastern time. It's 8:30 where you are, but I'm usually in bed at this time. I have a weird, I kicked a whole bunch of things out of my life, prescription drugs that I was on and alcohol and all that. And I find that I now go to sleep at like 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night. So this is late for me, but I'm happy that you could join us. When I put up a headline that says that there's a risk that Putin will go nuclear, obviously all the headlines that I've been reading lately about this conflict has been predominantly about how Russia is not, the war is not going how they had planned it would go. And I am curious, you have a extensive military background. You're still part of the military, I believe, National Guard in California. Is that right?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. And when you see a headline like that, is it difficult for the average citizen to not take it seriously? I know that people talk about tactical nukes since Desert Storm. I've been hearing that phrase a lot more in the last 20, 25 years, especially, and how there's this fear that that nuclear war could break out because of these tactical nukes. But is it the West and the media in the West trying to bait Putin into not using them, or is there a real risk that this man, his back is against the wall and it's something that is a distinct possibility?
So there's a lot there. I would say when I see a title like that, one is if you worry about Putin using a nuclear weapon, then you should also worry about Putin rewriting the global rules-based international order. And that's probably as complex for people that just the average person just doesn't know to understand. But there are rules to how nation states interact with each other, how they go to war, sovereign land, all these rules that have been put in place for hundreds of years. But really, I mean, the nuclear age started in, when there's only been one country that's ever used it. But even after that, then all the people of the world got together and said, okay, nuclear weapons, what are they used for? Mostly, like, there's lots of academic theory, right? Which is all theory about the use of nuclear weapons in the world, in war, in World War, even in World War III, if that, God forbid, ever started. So a tactical nuclear weapon. So one, we have to explain to people what that means.
Please.
So any nuclear weapon will have strategic consequences, right? It'll matter to the world. What Putin has tried to do in Ukraine, and why Ukraine should matter to everyone in the United States and it should matter to everybody in the world, is he's tried to rewrite the rules on which nations can interact with each other. He literally tried to take the second largest country in Europe by force because of the fact that Ukraine doesn't have a nuclear weapon, he does. So then he sent his military into Ukraine, not to follow any of the rules of war, as in like how militaries even conduct a war if they feel like they're just, right? A just war. But a tactical nuclear weapon is by definition, it means it's a battlefield weapon, right? It has a certain explosive force, or what we call yield. It isn't, and its delivery method isn't like intercontinental, right? So it's not a weapon that a nation would shoot at another nation because its survival is threatened. It means that, and it's really a Cold War term, it means in a battle between nations, you could drop one of these off, like destroy a city, to have a battlefield effect, not to have a global spark of mutually shared destruction, right? The old movies you'd watch when once that first missile flies towards the United States and then more are flying, and you have what's called mutually shared destruction. Although most people understand that even Russia's nuclear capabilities, although it has more numbers, and what we're seeing in their military, they haven't kept that arsenal up. My personal John Spencer belief when I see a title like that is just not informed. The number one interest of any nation, even in a terrorist state or a rogue nation, or an evil nation, their number one concern, and what we teach in military colleges around the world, is survival. If Putin were to go so far as to set a weapon of mass destruction, nuclear, biological, chemical, he would rewrite in this war, right? So not in Saddam Hussein, who'd used chemical weapons on the Kurds in his own country. If Putin would use a tactical nuclear weapon, it would be the end of Putin, its regime, and the end of Russian Federation. It would be a history-defining, changing moment. Does that mean if Putin loses in Ukraine, he has no alternative? Absolutely not. If Putin, which he will, lose in Ukraine, does that mean he needs to, again, any rational person, if Putin wants to stay in power a lot or stay alive, honestly, then he doesn't have that as an option. And he actually has rattled this nuclear saber for years. And it's not just because of Ukraine. He has made public statements of, hey, look, I have nuclear weapons, many times.
Yeah, it's a weird saber rattling kind of tactic. There's a cold comfort in the Cold War mutual assured destruction, isn't there? Like that. I remember being a kid and watching those old videos about duck and cover and stuff like that. About the way that if a nuclear strike happened, you get under your desk and cover. And I used to kind of laugh at that, but also be like, holy crap, that must have been scary, because the teachers must have been like, this isn't going to work. Like, we're just going to get incinerated if we do this.
I had to do it in the military, like in an open field, like face into the blast and cover yourself with the hope that it would just be the shockwave that ripples over you.
But that idea of two big nations having the sort of final pragmatic thought of, if I launch this, we're all dead. I don't know. That seems more stable than what we're dealing with today.
Right, but it is the rule, right? The rule is these weapons are used for your survival. Nobody's threatening the survival of Russia. Nobody. The
Mhm.
only people threatening the survival of an entire 40 million nation is Russia in Ukraine.
Mhm.
So and this is the fallacy of understanding. And I'm not a Putin expert, and I'm not a Russian expert, but the
Right.
fallacy of he has to do something. He can't lose. He has to save face. He has to retaliate. You backed the bear into a corner. It's just not the realism of the situation in Russia. He is an autocrat who can say and do whatever he wants. And he says some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
In his nation, he's free to do that. He can say, the world, the world is flat, and the people in his country must believe that. So he can say tomorrow, I have won in Ukraine, and we're now going to live in peace. He can
Yeah.
pull out tomorrow. It doesn't. This is not a prisoner's dilemma. This is not you sunk sunk cost theory. He can, and it would be a common sense decision at this point. I can't see any military alternative in which Putin wins his stated objective at this moment.
Yeah, because even the places that he's just declared annexed with the sham referendums that he had, most of those places are already being taken back by the Ukraine forces, are they not?
Absolutely. And he never controlled them outright. So it would literally be like Mexico one day waking up and saying, "Hey, Texas is mine. I voted.
Yeah.
It's mine." That's how crazy what he's done. And again, there are these rules like international law about the way nations can interact in what will be recognized by the world. And there are areas of the world which are literally in conflict. Like, okay, it's because of the lines that were drawn in 1918 and when the Soviet Union busted up. There are like there are there are debates in countries about border areas like Kashmir, Azerbaijan, like all these places. There is no debate on where the border of Ukraine is and what is sovereign Ukraine land.
Um, I'd be remiss, I think, if I didn't play devil's advocate just for a second and wonder what the strategy of NATO is when they kept building bases closer and closer to the Russian border. What is the strategy? I'm not saying that they deserved that Ukraine deserved to be attacked because of it. I'm not even saying that they were backing Putin into a corner or anything. I'm just curious what the motive was to keep moving bases closer to the border.
Yeah. One, the NATO alliance is a defensive alliance, and what, like, why does Putin get to say what's too close in a country? Like every country is a sovereign country; they can do what they want. If you want to build a base in Poland, build a base in Poland. And that being the reason for this war was busted. Like one, it wasn't what Russia stated in Putin in writing that he doesn't believe Ukraine should exist as a country. It isn't the reality of even Ukraine. Once a democratic nation said, "Okay, if that's your issue with me, I won't join NATO," and he's still invaded. What's the reasoning for building defensive bases in your country? I mean, every country's again number one pursuit is survival, and so the rationale this is about NATO. What did Putin do? And so the biggest strategic blunder in the world of the modern era was using that as an argument. And now literally the most neutral countries in history, Finland and Sweden, are now on his border. He just doubled his border with NATO. I mean, I honestly think the rule book in which allowed him to invade Ukraine is wrong, but it is the rule book, right? Ukraine wasn't a member of NATO. And there are standards for joining the membership, and every nation has to vote. But it's a historic moment that if that was the rationale on how awful it went for Putin, that now Finland and Sweden, I mean, Finland is, I don't know if you've ever seen that on the map, it's huge. And they actually kicked the Soviet Union's butt. I mean, if you were trying, yeah, absolutely.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I didn't know Finland ever gotten into a war.
Little
I know.
The Winter War. Look, you think about the Winter Soldier, like the Winter War. It's huge. This is the reality of one. If I see a title like that, I just wish people were more informed, because if not, they listen to different voices. Right there is every one of us, to include the United States, should use our system to put forth the facts on who we are, what we stand for, what are the actions that we're going to take, what is the actions of our enemy, right? Russia and China have been the stated enemies of the United States before this war for a long, because they have done things to put them in that position.
Fire. There, we had a comment there. Fire in effect said the U.S. said the same thing. Putin is saying when Russians put nukes in Cuba. Is the difference between that and what Putin deals with NATO simply water? Like there's almost no legitimate reason that Russia could have said that they're putting nukes in Cuba other than to have an offensive tactical advantage.
Yeah.
Because United States is surrounded by water on the east and west, so there were and south. So there wouldn't be any other strategic reason to put anything there. Is that really the main difference? That Russia is that NATO was building bases in sovereign countries, and Russia was taking the tiny island of Cuba and putting nukes there just as a provocation? Is that the difference?
Those are definitely major differences in both the reasons for the actions, right? So the reason that, like you said, the reason Russia was putting a nuclear weapon that close is because it could range and threaten the United States' safety. There's nothing going on in Europe that was threatening the safety of Russia. Back to that, objective fact, there was nobody threatening the borders of Russia.
But did those NATO bases have nukes?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
No, absolutely not. Matter of fact, the trajectory of nuclear weapons has been actually down, not up. Those bases didn't even have Patriot interceptors, which are contentious, where you put things that can intercept other people's missiles.
Right.
So that has been contentious in recent history. But Ukraine doesn't have nuclear weapons. Matter of fact, it does lead to the theory of that mutual deterrence. There's something called strategic deterrence. Having the weapon brings you safety. Where other people believe that shouldn't be the case, but it's the reality of the world. And that's why, again, Russia can't use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine because it is the surest path to its destruction.
Yeah. The war as it's taking place right now, it's hard for me to sort of wade through. Like, the world is sort of on Ukraine's side. There's a few countries that are, I guess, on Russian side. The political situation in the United States is really interesting, because when I was a kid growing up, from Rocky movies to, just regular news, there was always sort of this demonstrative anti-Russia kind of vibe, especially from Republicans. And they're awfully quiet now. And I don't understand, like, the political reason as to why they're not saying things like, the old KGB agent needs to go down. Da, da, da. Is polarization to blame for that?
Absolutely.
Is that it?
Yeah. And there are plenty of people. I mean, we still have bipartisan support, but the polarization and divisiveness, you have to oppose the other side if you're not the party, you're the dominant party or whatever. But I'm proud that from day one of this war, we've had bipartisan support, as in voting to continue and lead the world in our aid of freedom, right? This is about freedom and democracy and maintaining the global order that is assuring our prosperity, right? Because that's what people don't understand. Even economically, us helping Ukraine is about our economic stability, because dude's upsetting the entire global international order. And when China doesn't even back you, like, whoa, nobody has backed Russia at this point, in saying that what he's doing is justified. It's not even Axis versus, it's literally a rogue leader and a rogue nation, not even executing a war if it was justified in their mind. So yes, in today's politics, you have to oppose the other side, no matter if it is actually at the core of our values of who we are. But it's a small segment that does get a lot of attention, because if it bleeds, it leads. We have bipartisan support for Ukraine, and I don't see that changing, even if there's a red swing come November.
What would a Ukrainian NATO membership do to the like what would it do to this war if they actually? It doesn't look like they're going to get membership like in the next 6 months or something, right? Like it's a long process, right?
It can be sped up. There's some people who say you can't do it with a country in conflict. Basically when there's active contest, that's actually not a written rule, but absolutely, it ain't going to happen until they achieve full victory. And this conflict ends as in its current fashion, which is inevitable. It's not going to happen because every nation has to vote, which is I've learned even from this that every nation has to vote that a new member be added, and it's crazy how like Turkey can like require all the other nations to give them stuff to vote yes for a nation that is clearly should be. I don't know if you've seen that, but
no, is that like a quid pro quo? You want my vote?
Absolutely.
You got to give me something.
Absolutely. So Turkey's been doing that for Finland and Sweden's, which are like there's no reason not to. But they're like all like literally we're down like 3 nations, but Turkey had first said no, and then he's like, well, if you give me F-35s, if you cast out these people that I don't like that are actually in your country, then I'd vote yes. Which is just it's politics, right? All war is politics by other means. Some of it's very overt, and some of it's covert.
Are you surprised? Like when before the war started, would you have predicted that it would have gone this way for Russia? Like not because you were for Ukraine, but just as a tactical kind of an opinion, where let's say you didn't have a side that you were kind of rooting for or whatever. But and I should let the audience know, and I believe this is true. The handbook that you wrote on urban warfare was used by the Ukrainian military, the part of the military that was in charge of training civilian forces. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And it was mass printed by the civilians themselves. So over 100,000 copies were printed by Ukrainian publishers in Ukrainian early in the war when this was more about civilians like Red Dawn, like going out and fighting in their own streets and protecting their homes and their families and their cities.
I think that's amazing. That like you're basically one of the cogs in the wheel of warfare for Ukraine and the successes that they're having defending their country. But before the war started, is this something that you would have predicted with Russia versus Ukraine, that it would be going so badly for Russia?
Absolutely not. I don't think anybody, no, even people that I respect that are Russia experts. Like I'm not a Russia expert. I'm an urban warfare expert, right? So I'm a one-trick pony. Even people that I know that are Russian experts did not know the rot of the Russian military. Everybody, to include, I worked in the Pentagon, believed Russia was the second most powerful military in the world. Matter of fact, I sat through briefings where they had beliefs that the Russian military was advancing the U.S. military in things like artillery and all this. Nobody knew the rot that was below the surface of the Russian military, and some of that you can't discover until you engage with your enemy. And this is what we've discovered. So I would have never imagined the Ukrainian army. One, I had also not had experience with the Ukrainian people, right? This does come down to a culture and a people's willingness to fight. And I think it is justified to do comparisons with other nations like Afghanistan. The only thing that saved Ukraine in the beginning was a nation up defending their right to be free, democracy. Russia believed, and I think they had good reason, that they could subjugate millions by force, because there is lots of history to show that if you present a military force, you can achieve your goals by just fear.
Yeah, I may have asked you this last time, but do you think that it was a mistake to just allow Russia to annex Crimea? Did that embolden them to do what they're doing today?
I mean, globally, absolutely. But I will say, so Ukraine, like you said, it's becoming a war of good versus evil. It wasn't necessarily that could be argued in the beginning. But it's the way that Russia's fought the war that has garnered Ukraine over 50 nations, to include the leader of the free world, full support. Ukraine had, unlike Crimea, Ukraine had to show that it was willing to fight for its complete survival. I'm not an expert in I just feel in deep in as a person that Ukraine had to show the world that they were willing to fight for their freedom, and that garners global support. And then they fought just this master class of the narrative all the way up to today, in how they fight, and what they stand for is what the almost every of the 200 plus nations of the world also stand for: human rights, freedom, individual rights. Genocide is bad, war crimes are bad. All these things that the world should stand up for. That in Crimea, because of the way that the operation was executed, right through this new generation of warfare, with actually turning it into an argument that you're liberating a country, a part of a country that wants to be Russian. That narrative has now fallen silent because it's just ridiculous, because the Ukrainian people have shown the world with their actions that that's not true.
When I had you on the first time, it was I think the war was 2 months old or something like that. How stark is the difference, especially if you're a civilian fighter who is conscripted? How stark is the difference between sort of being holed up in a city and defending that city from an invasion, and now pushing the enemy back to their borders? From an urban warfare perspective, how I mean, I know there must be a stark difference, but how would the military adjust? How would morale be adjusted? Is it seen? Do you become invigorated and pumped up with the idea of now we're pushing them back? This is great. How do you describe the mindset and the tactics of the difference between being holed up in your city and then pushing back?
Yeah, it's night and day. I mean, all war, there's both offense and defense. But 2 months ago, and this is before I visited, right? After we talked, I went to Ukraine myself. I had to see some of this stuff from my own eyes. This was a nation defending itself. But the Ukrainian military at the time was a very small, untested, developing force. We're 6 months down the road. Now Ukrainian people haven't been conscripted. That's the difference between fighting a volunteer army, fighting for their freedom, and fighting a conscripted, drafted, forced military in a foreign country, fighting for the wrong reasons.
Oh, I thought that the Ukrainian military, the government said that any 18-year-old and over must go into I don't know. It wasn't.
So they did martial law. So no male from 18 to 60 could leave the country.
Oh, okay.
They were told to resist, and they did. But the way so there's mandatory service, which is not conscription. It is you part of being a citizen is you serve. But they have had so many volunteers, and this is when I talked to you 2 months ago. Civilians just in civilian clothes were fighting, just tens of thousands of them. Well, those joined voluntarily the military. So much so that my driver, when I was in Ukraine, was a 21-year-old guy. It's like, hey, you're going to serve? He's like, the way that the call-ups haven't happened, so the mandatory service has been only with veterans so far, because they've had enough veterans. Could you see could they say that you have to serve? Absolutely, they could, based on mandatory service. At this point, what Russia is doing is the opposite of that, right? They're doing call-up conscription, of calling back anybody who had already served mandatory service, which then go into a reserve force, which is just, I served in the military once. Now for my next 30 plus years, I have to come back if you call me. And most of them are voting with their feet. I don't know if you've seen this, James. So they called up 200,000, the Russians did, saying, hey, come fight for Russia in Ukraine. And
most of them fled, I think.
Yeah, 400,000 to 700,000 men fled the country. That's just insane, and should tell you a lot about, is this a just war for Russia? It is not a threat to their survival, and their people know it.
Is it a proxy war?
Absolutely.
We don't hear about that too often, right? I think look, I'm on Ukrainian side. I see it also as a sort of good versus evil thing, and obviously I think Putin's a completely corrupt individual. But the media, the veneer of the Zelensky being the hero, and I know he's done some great things and stuff. And I talked to you about this a little bit the last time, where I didn't like the photo shoot and stuff like that. But
Yeah, I do remember
now,
that. Yeah.
yeah, now it feels like the story is, for me, what the media isn't really saying. When I think that them not saying it kind of emboldens critics, and that is that it's a proxy war. Money is sent there, weapons are sent there, but you never hear that phrase, proxy war. Why do you think that is?
I think it leads to complexity, and people want things simplified for them. They want to understand faster. The United States military is in like 164 countries. Proxy warfare is, again, in that rule book of what nation states do. I have enemies of the world. I don't have to fight them. I can send weapons to other people who are fighting them. And if it weakens my enemy, absolutely. Even if it wasn't a fight of good and evil, right? And people like references. So like we were supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan,
yeah.
which assisted in the fall of the Soviet Union, right? An empire.
But there was also blowback, right?
Absolutely. If you think about the madrasas that were stood up along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, much of what we had to deal with later in the global war on terrorism was stuff that we financed and helped create.
Yeah, that's the tough part, because I think that as a student of recent history, and as a person who I started getting into politics during Desert Storm, and I was sort of fascinated by the culture of the military, and there was a part of me at the time that was almost like, wow, I would totally love the opportunity to defend my country if it ever came to that. But how ignorant are North Americans to what it's like to experience what the Ukrainian people are experiencing right now, to have a war inside their own country?
Yeah, I mean, it's and that's what I actually felt. So I served twice in Iraq, one in the invasion and one later during the height of their civil war, as they're trying to create a new Iraq, which ended up falling apart as soon as we left because of sectarian reasons. The stories and the people I was meeting in Ukraine was more analogous to our own story of breaking free of British control in our revolution, and who stood up to fight, Lexington, Concord. The stories that I was watching in Ukraine are more analogous to that than anything else that I've studied in history. And that is the deal. Like a lot of people in Ukraine don't like Zelensky. I don't know if we talked about that, but the unity.
I tried to, but you were like, he's a hero, James.
But that's politically. But the hard times create hard people. The unity. We were just talking about our device. Like literally, we have people that will oppose like the stupidest stuff just because it's the other political party. There is such unity in Ukraine that it is so pure and almost envious in their day-to-day lives and their unity as a people. Like they'll come out of this, right? That's why Ukraine is not Ukraine that was 2014. Ukraine is not the Ukraine that was at the beginning of this year. They have created a new nation and a new people that have banded together, right? That's amazing. And it gave me an amazing feeling while I was there. And when I'm here in my community and I watch our politics and our January 6th, all of this, it's really sad that we are so divided. Because after 9/11, we were at the height of our, we had another challenge to who we are as a people that united us. We need uniters in our country. What Zelensky has done is just kept the fire that was lit for this whole time, which is hard to do as the war drags on. But that unity in the Ukrainian people is insane.
Yeah, I remember seeing a poll when it was like 2015 or so, and it was a poll of registered Republicans, and it was something crazy like 31% of registered Republicans had more respect for Vladimir Putin than of Barack Obama. And I'm just like, holy shit. Like, I feel like if aliens invaded, like Mega would be like, uh, do they have good weapons? Because I'd love to shoot me some libtards or something. Do you know what I mean? Some progressives might be at the end of my laser beam because it's so divided there. Is there is the off topic, but I'm just curious now that we're talking about it. Is there anything that could war unify United States if it came to their shores? You think?
So absolutely, it would. Do I think that's in any realm of the possible? No. One, we're the most powerful nation in the world, so we have unique borders. There's the water borders that um, could somebody strike our interest, right? So that's what the thing about the U.S. military is it's we spend our tax money to have this powerful military to not only defend our country, as in the homeland, but defend our interest in our prosperity. So that's where it gets complex. And I've had the beauty of having you know, you learned and have an education and curiosity of learning how this works, how geopolitics works. Yes, absolutely, it would unite us. But I think that a lot of this is leadership too. Look, even for an American not to understand that the president that is in office is your president is a major issue. Like there's some presidential elections I didn't even vote. Doesn't matter. Like our leader is our leader by our process, and that's it. If we can't agree to that, we have issues, but those issues are how to resolve those is a wicked problem. But yes, adversity creates unity, and that's why after 9/11 we had great unity for a while.
Yeah, I remember that very well. I remember George Bush being at Ground Zero with his bullhorn and saying that they're going to hear from all of us soon. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, like 9/11. I don't know if you've ever talked to non-Americans about how they felt on 9/11. I was living in Toronto, and I was watching. Whatever I was watching was interrupted, and they had that sort of like still camera on a live shot on the towers. One of them was smoking, and then we saw live that plane come in from the right side of the screen and hit the second building. And I was on the phone with a friend, and we didn't say anything for like 45 minutes. We were just watching this screen take place. Like it was one of those transformational moments for people that were outside of America. And the unity that you're talking about was palpable. And then I guess it went away probably around 2003. Before that, probably, but I mean, it really went away 2003 because of how divided the public was over the war in Iraq at the time. Do you think that when the dust settles with Ukraine and Russia, this might be a question that you can't answer, but do you think that the political capital that Zelensky's been able to garner up until now, most of the time those leaders will last another year or two and then they're gone, right? That's like the Churchill effect sort of thing.
Absolutely. Or the George Washington effect.
Yeah.
He stepped down. They asked him to do many more years. And that's what good leaders do, is recognize that the moment that the nation, when the nation needs you, you rise to the moment, or some don't. And then when that moment is over, the system continues, and that's why you rose to the moment. So absolutely, I think after Ukraine achieves, it's going, recognizing that this is where I get frustrated, just as a normal guy, that people don't recognize Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a history altering moment. Unlike whataboutisms around the world, 9/11 was a history changing moment. I think, unlike any other moment since then, and a lot of people play whataboutisms because there's lots of bad things happening all around the world, but because of who it was, how it was executed, that was a history changing moment that has nothing to do with whether I care about Ukraine because, like you said, good versus evil. If I just cared about, if I'm some type of isolationist, it was a history changing moment. And I'm proud that the world, just like people that had nothing to do with the United States, joined the United States. And after 9/11 is that the United States has led the way in helping Ukraine defend itself.
Would you think? Would you say that in a totally different way, that the drone program is a history-changing tactic?
No, I mean so we have these things, called revolutions in military affairs. So things that fundamentally change the way warfare is conducted: nuclear weapons, machine gun, the tank, airplane,
Submarine.
and submarine.
Yeah.
No, I think the drone is an evolution of aerial capabilities. It is we have these fancy words about democratization of technology. When military capability is available to the masses, and you have a levée en masse, what they call it, when the French were the first to start with this, I'm fighting for my nation. Everybody's a part of this fight. Those are revolutions in military affairs. The drone is an evolution of aerial capabilities. There's a little bit of the element of where anybody can pick up a drone and have an impact if the other military is so inept that they allow it.
Right.
Just like the IED. The IED wasn't something new that to military affairs, to militaries fighting in counterinsurgencies. It's just they put it on scale. The Iranians taught them how to do it better. These kind of things. So no.
It's funny when you're a lay guy like me that doesn't really understand a lot of the way that military operates. But I remember growing up and seeing Princess Diana being really anti-landmine because it was seen as inhumane. And then like 15 years later, drones are dropping bombs on people, right? Like, I don't know why I'm laughing, but it just seems like such a paradox.
Yeah, I mean, so there are people in this world, and good for them, if that's their meaning in life, is to hope for the pursuit of a world without war. I think that only the dead know the end of war, and there's always going to be war. There can be peace dividends, but the history of the human race is that there will be war. But this is why we established all these alliances to prevent wars, right? All these organizations and alliances and treaties and global standards that should cause war not to happen as frequently.
A lot of people that I know and a lot of conservatives that I've talked to, I talked to General Spalding about a year ago, I think, about what the future holds. And it's always talks about China. China is like the sleeping giant. China is like the next great fight, and Taiwan is going to be the spark plug that causes the next war. Do you have any thoughts about that? And do you think that China has imperialistic goals, or are they mostly just like seeking to enrich themselves economically by mining in Africa and places like that, in Afghanistan and things like that?
So it's not my area of expertise, but I dabble in national security a little bit. So I actually think if you view the four forms of a nation's power, right, it's diplomatic, information, military, and economic. Does China aggressively try to lessen another country like the United States power? Absolutely. So they do intellectual property stealing, alliances, actions that are meant to degrade your enemy, proxy warfare. There are a few places in the world that aren't connected to this global world that we've created, right? Whether it's economically, militarily, and there are contested areas even between China and the United States, right? Taiwan, places like that. I say yes, absolutely. Judge a China by its actions. Is it threatening the U.S. forms of power and the U.S. ways of life? Absolutely, by its actions, not just in Africa but around the world. And there's lots of people that are better experts than I am on that. Same thing with Russia. Same thing with Iran and North Korea. That's why we're a global leaders, and the only superpower left is because we have both a defensive capability. It's the power of our relationships around the world and our diplomatic power, right? That diplomatic power. And I actually got that in an interview today. Did people think that today are more people interested in forming a relationship with the United States? Like, there's nobody escaping Ukraine to go live in Russia. There's nobody escaping. People want to live in the West. China, I will say that there are people within the global community that need an enemy, right? So sometimes China is made out to be the sleeping giant enemy that we need to keep our constituents investing in national security.
Yeah, I mean, you know, sometimes I want to ask people like yourself questions that have to do with sort of like we don't tolerate China disrupting, say, the like internet or patent pirating or things like that, but we do the same thing to them, right? Like,
This is so. You make me think of this amazing moment that I had at West Point while teaching there, and we had the General Clapper, I think it was, National Security Advisor and Director, who talked about Russia getting into our elections. You said that's espionage. If somebody would have brought to me on my desk, leading our intelligence service, and say, "Hey, you can influence the politics of another country at no cost, almost without anybody knowing," that's a good day.
well,
Absolutely.
You've done it many times, right?
Yeah. Sometimes it didn't go well for us, right? Iran and other places. Absolutely. That's what, again, this is the rule book of nation states, right? Espionage, proxy warfare. It is the world we live in. Russia is outside of this. And it is it is becoming a rogue nation. It has nuclear weapons. That should concern every citizen of the world.
I just have a couple more questions. One of them, though, I just thought of it. I had Reality Winner on earlier this week. She was the whistleblower who leaked classified material to the Intercept when she was a translator at the NSA, and it was talking about the Russian interference in the 2016 election. What are your thoughts on whistleblowers like her, or just people like Edward Snowden or Assange or Chelsea Manning? Do you have a sort of patriotic idea of what they are and that they shouldn't have blown the whistle, or do you think that some of them or one of them or whoever might have had good reason to do that?
That's a tough one. So it does challenge my personal beliefs versus my study of the world. My personal belief is that there's I live by a code, and I raise my family in a code of honor and respect and loyalty, and there is responsibility as being a member of a nation. You have responsibility to that nation. Absolutely, there have been times when our nation is on the wrong track, and there have been great Americans who stood up and blown the whistle, which then corrects the system that is going off. But if the individual actually puts in their actions that are kind of caked in this greater cause, are actually putting the members of the country at risk. So that's my thoughts towards Snowden. He released information that actually put other Americans at risk, not just saying there's an issue. There is a spectrum on whistleblowing to where
Daniel Ellsberg being probably one of the good ones, and Julian Assange maybe being probably one of the best. Is that sort of the spectrum, or
Deep Throat versus Assange? Some people, like, you have to analyze their intentions and what they actually are causing. It's history. I have my personal feelings that some of them I agree with, and some of them I don't.
You're in a tough. I won't ask you questions like that again, because you are in a tough spot, because you don't want to, because of your position and because of your career in the military. I imagine it might be tough to be like, yes, Reality Winner really should have leaked those classified documents. I can't imagine you really saying that, right? So
no, I mean, so technically I'm a member of still a California State Guard. Right. When I started helping Ukraine, I had to disassociate because I know how the system works. Like, the U.S. Government could not be assisting Ukraine in killing, without the process. So when I created that manual for Ukraine civilians, I had to disassociate from any association with the U.S. government, and I'm okay with that. There are human aspects, and that's why, again, I live my life by a code, to do good. In some of these people that have, not all of them, their intentions weren't good. Even if they say they were, they wouldn't have done the things that they did. But it is what it is.
And I know that wartime is never really a time for predictions, but we'll wrap with this. If you had to guess, how would you say the next few months will go in Ukraine, like tactical nukes notwithstanding? Is the momentum shift enough for them to put it away, or is it impossible to tell, and we could be there for years?
No, I think that what they've shown the world is that if they continue to receive the level of aid, if not more, that they've already gotten, that they can put that to use, and they're on the path to victory. They're getting stronger as a military, which is what General Milley, the Joint Chief of Staff, said a couple months ago, is that we want Russia weak so it can never do this again. They're getting weaker every day. They're doubled down now with this mobilization, and they could mobilize, draft. They're not mobilizing reserves, just to be clear. They could double down and send more Russian people into Ukraine to die. So I think this war ends in months, not years, because of just from a military analysis, Russia it's so weak. It isn't, out, but it's so weak, and we've given Ukraine such sophisticated weapons, and they're using them at great success, that Russia's in just such a precarious position in multiple fronts. I see, there's a common sense thing for Putin and Russian military to do. They're not going to do that. So over the next few months, we're going to see thousands and thousands and thousands of Russian soldiers die. Winter's going to fundamentally change this war. Fighting in the winter is night and day to fighting in the summer. And they're going to continue to get pushed back until either somebody makes a decision in Russia to change the trajectory of the Putin regime and the Russian military, whether that's I can't make any predictions. I can predict that Russian military will continue to lose in Ukraine, and at great cost. It's still going to cost the Ukrainians. There's no bloodless war. It's still costing Ukraine blood and treasure, but the scales of loss are heavily weighted, and we're going to continue to see that. And eventually, Ukraine is going to cause the Russian military to culminate all over the front of its line, and actually push back to even 2014 boundaries of its country.
John Spencer, I love having you on. I always feel like before you come on, I'm like, I don't really know much about the military. And then after you leave, I know a little bit more, but I still feel dumb.
Me too, man. I'm just a student of this stuff. I just have had a blessed life and now a blessed job.
Well, listen, I appreciate the time that you take. I'd love to have you back in a month or two just to see what the landscape looks like then. So again, appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. John Spencer, urban warfare expert and the author of Connected Soldiers, Life, Leadership, and the Social Connections in Modern War. I love talking to him. He's down to earth. He's a great military professional. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He doesn't. There's nothing unreasonable about him, and he always gives us the straight goods, and I appreciate that. It's been a long day, so I'm just going to split. But tomorrow, don't forget, we have Ann Schwartz on the show. Tomorrow is the premiere of the Jeffrey Dahmer documentary on Netflix in the United States. And the reason why I wanted to have Ann Schwartz on it is because she is the author of Dahmer. Oh, I always forget the name of the book. Now I have to go back again. She is the author of Monster. The true story of the Jeffrey Dahmer murders. But more importantly, Ann Schwartz is the reporter that actually broke the story in 1991 of Jeffrey Dahmer and his killings. So she is basically a historical figure when it comes to that story, and she is going to be live with us tomorrow at 7 p.m. So please tune into that. Big thanks to Dr. Michael Geist earlier today at 7. And thank you to Dean for joining me, and a big thanks to John Spencer. And we will see you next time on Blackballed.
Blackballed. Blackballed.